I'm going to tell them this lie for their benefit so that when it starts, they'll be ready for what's to come, for the miracles that are to come.
All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Real Review. My name's Kevin.
And I'm Adam.
And we are your real movie guys. And don't forget, if you like what you see and you want to see more, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel today. On today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at Midnight Mass. An isolated island community experiences miraculous events and frightening omens after the arrival of a charismatic, mysterious young priest. Before we even talk about the monster that is Midnight Mass, I want to let you guys know I highly recommend, and Adam agrees too, you should watch this show before you even listen or take a look at our review. Midnight Mass is something I think that should be enjoyed as blind as possible. We're not going to talk about any kind of spoilers in this show. However, I think some of the conversation we have does lead into different things that may just make you aware of events that are going to occur in the show. Again, not necessarily a spoiler, but you're 100% better off going blind. So if you can, what I want you to do, check out this show, then come back and hang out with us. That'll give you the best experience for sure. So Adam, Mike Flanagan is probably one of the best directors working today. Now, what films and materials have you been experienced with him so far?
The more memorable ones that come to my mind immediately are the other Netflix shows that he's done.
Sure.
I think there was the one last year, which was The Haunting of Bly Manor. The year before that was The Haunting of Hill House.
Correct. Now, those are probably most people are familiar with, and Midnight Mass follows in the same suit of those two TV shows. I remember Oculus was a big deal when that came out. I wasn't a huge fan, but I can understand that people were. He also did the Stephen King remake of the short story Gerald's Game, another actual Netflix thing. So Mike Flanagan does have a long working relationship with Netflix, obviously, having his series and even a subsequent TV show come out. My favorite piece of work he's done are two things. The Haunting of Hill House, I absolutely loved what you mentioned. That was definitely one of the more surprising horror shows I've seen in a long time. And we also did Dr. Sleep, which for me, The Shining is easily in my top 3 movies of all time. He married a good story to the book and the movie, and for me, that was definitely one of my favorite films of the year. This review, though, we're talking about Midnight Mass. Midnight Mass follows a similar tradition to The Haunting of Hill House and The Haunting of Bly Manor, but not quite the same. Now, Adam, you know that's something I gush about all the time. If you watched any review on this channel at this point, I don't shut up about cinematography. And what Mike Flanagan does here is he creates these scenes. When you first look at them, they're probably like, what angle are you going for? Because a lot of the times it's just two people talking to each other. I would argue about 85% of the show is probably just that. So Flanagan has to make that interesting to your eye. And whether that's a good or a bad thing might rely maybe on the viewer at some point. But for me, I think he always makes it visually interesting. There's some scenes of Father Paul and Riley. They're having these discussions. Essentially, Father Paul is hosting like an AA meeting for Riley, who's a recovering alcoholic, and they just have conversations, right? They're just going back and forth talking. These shots are, some might say they're bad, like I said, but he always has this weird, obscure shot where like Riley will be in the corner or Father Paul will be like in a corner of the camera. He never has a direct shot on any one of the characters, which I think creates this amazing sense of space. I think throughout the whole entire show, especially this being an island, I like how he plays with these images of scale and size compared to the other characters.
If anything, I just feel like the way that he does the cinematography, it just sets the tone for the show, and it creates this actual living space for these characters.
So who is this show for? Before we dive too much deeper into the other things I want to discuss for, this is an interesting amalgamation of things. The horror genre is commonly cliched as being scary stuff jumping at you, slashers. We've seen the paranormal works with Hill House. I would maybe make the argument that this show, it's not necessarily a horror show to some extent. This is more of a psychological analyzation of religion and other more heavy topics.
Yeah, I agree. I made note of the jump scares in this show. Like, there's a few, but it's definitely nowhere near any other, like, typical horror movie that's what it's looking for.
We talk a lot about, like you said, external horror elements. We get the typical jump scares, just visuals that we're seeing. I think what this show does more brilliantly than any other show is we have a lot of internal horror. This show likes to focus on people fearing things that they can't control and the results from choices they have made. One of the big themes, I think, here is death. There's quite a few scenes where characters just talk about death. There's actually one in particular where probably a good 20-minute conversation just about what happens when you die. Maybe at first it it does seem kind of a little obtuse and boring, but when you really look at what's going on here, it's just these different theories that are being crafted, and I think that's really interesting for a show to put out.
It just creates a sense of wonder. Yes, I guess it does create sort of a unnerving vibe for the show itself. It all adds to, once again, that whole universe that he's created here in the show.
Right, and that's what he does extremely well. Now, this show, we have to admit here, it is a slow burn. I don't know if you'd agree with this, but my take is it really doesn't hit home until about maybe end of episode 4, till we get to episode 5, where that might be one of the best episodes of a TV show I've seen in a very, very long time. If I could just really stress to you, make it to episode 5, it'll be worth your time. It really comes together. After that, it's still a well-done show. There's no issues with that. The tension's still there. But that episode 5 point, when you hit it, the show really cements what it's about to the viewer.
Yeah, it hits that crescendo right there. Because the entire show, I'm sitting there as I'm watching, just wondering, because literally anything can happen.
You're waiting for something to happen. There's some kind of expectation of an event that's going to occur.
Because Mike Flanagan, he does that a lot with his shows, where what's going to happen?
Right.
I have no idea what's going to happen or when it's going to happen. And once it hits that point, I don't know if I go to say chaotic, but there's a lot happens.
I know we're being vague here. This is a non-spoiler review. We don't want to talk about too much that's going on here. I will say there is a point where this story is going to change. If you're not into slow burns, I think you're going to have a harder time getting into this show. That slow burn, I don't want it to be confused as boring. I think it's more character development than anything else. And it is necessary for this story to be as effective as it is. But once we get to this big twist, and the twist seems out of left field, but when you start putting the pieces together and seeing everything that's been built up to this point to where we are, it 100% works as far as theming and just the way it's implemented. I was extremely impressed. Dare I say, this was ambitious. I don't think I would have expected that from this show. Again, I'm going in here thinking this is a paranormal ghost story, just like Hill House and Bly Manor.
Right.
It's not. It's not whatsoever. Again, I think it takes its time to find its footing. I think that is something that will be discussed among a lot of people. We're in a society now where we want an instant payoff. You know, from episode 1 or episode 2, we were like, all right, what's the story about? Where are we going? You're not going to get that with this show. But again, that's not a bad thing. One thing I want to say that stood out to me, and it seems to be apparent in all his works as of late, especially in these miniseries he's making, is he's going for this great ensemble cast. I see him recycling a lot of the same great actors. And I think we see that again here, don't you, Adam?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. The acting in this show is so good. Between the acting and the cinematography, it all just comes together, and it is so enjoyable to watch.
This is one of those rare shows where I really like a character and I really hate a character for all the right reasons. Not because they was badly performed, not because they were poorly written, but because the show invested me so heavily with every single one of these characters. Even the minor ones still had some kind of effect on me when something would happen or they'd be involved with a certain plot. Adam, were there any characters that stood out to you? Was there any particular performances that you really enjoyed for this show?
I think that Raul Coley plays the Sheriff Hassan in the show. I think he did a fantastic job in that role.
I think he did too. Some of the parallels they're playing with his character, again, work on this big overall theming that they're talking about in the show. I haven't really seen him in much. I know he's another new constant, I think, in Flanagan's work. He was in The Haunting of Bly Manor. They worked really well together. Great to see another character actor like that come back. My favorite character, if this doesn't get some kind of buzz as far as awards, I'm going to be very upset, Adam. Hamish Linklater as Father Paul is one of the most incredible performances I've seen in a character in horror and even drama acting. I mean, this man hits every single point you would want for this type of show. His performance of like muttering and stumbling and being charismatic and exciting at the same time and being deeply conflicted and horrifying in another. He hits so many different spectrums of the personality area. He carries the show on his shoulders a lot of the time, especially for this religious material that we're dealing with. His conviction really came across to me.
Yeah, he does such a good job at conveying that even though he goes through all of these situations, or even the fact that he's a priest, it shows that he's still human. He still makes mistakes. He still has emotions, and he conveys it so well in his performance.
Right. And it's so important because when you look at his character, they're on a small island. We've talked about the setting here. He has to interact with essentially every single character on the show to some extent. And it's very rare, I have to tell you, that one actor has chemistry with every single person in the show. No matter who he interacted with, 100% believed what was going on. He sold the show to me a lot of the times when there were things maybe that weren't necessarily in the realm of believability. He sold it to me.
I agree, because I think that's where the idea of it being a show or a
Right.
series is definitely beneficial compared to like a movie,
Right.
because that's what allows these characters to get more fleshed out.
Room to
Right,
breathe.
exactly.
Everyone
Yeah.
has their scene. I didn't feel like anyone was shortchanged. I mean, there's going to be people, of course, that are going to argue this could have been shorter. Why couldn't this have been 5 episodes? Or why couldn't you do this in a movie? I don't think it works. I think it could only be told this way for what he was going for, especially for me to become so invested in what he was trying to do.
Yeah, I think the story is the perfect length. I don't know how well it would have worked in a movie sense. Any longer and it would have been too long.
I agree with you. I really couldn't see it any other way. Last actor I really just want to give a quick shout out to, Samantha Sloane. I hate her, not the actress. I hate her character. She plays Bev Keane. Now, like I said, either you love it or hate it. I hated her. Her performance was just on there with Father Paul. She drove a lot of the negativity in this show. More importantly, I think she's going to go into what this show really wants to talk about, and that might put some people off. Obviously, it's called Midnight Mass. I don't think we're hiding the fact that this is a religious show. Not religious as in preaching, but religious as it's examining the good and bad that comes with a strong belief in religion. Bev happens to be the absolute negative point of what constructive religion can do. Father Paul happens to be a good balance of, I think, both, with, believing in the great and also being some little issues with it. Every character has a different place in this, which I think that the show utilizes so strongly, especially if you're experienced in some form of organized religion. More specifically, this show, I think, really lays it on to Christianity, which some of our more enigmatic Christian followers out there might take issue with, but I don't think the show really shows it as negative. If you could look at this from a constructive perspective of someone just looking at religion and what it does to people, I think there's something really interesting. There's a really great discussion here. What this show does, and I've talked about it kind of evolving the horror genre, this show just really raises horror to critical thinking heights. He wants you to think. Flanagan's very famous for never giving you a serious answer. He wants you to think about what's going on in the show. His themes of religion, death, rebirth, and just using these characters to tell that story. Every character serves as a discussion point. Every character represents a story, if you will. Circling this whole conversation back to what I was saying earlier, every character arc in this show feels like a parable, if you want to look at it that way.
Okay.
A lot of the times we'll see in the Christian faith, we tell a story, a parable from the Bible, which is a story meant to teach a lesson or have some kind of poignant message about how you should live your life and what you're doing with your life. And each of these characters and their arcs represent that. Again, I'm not going to go into details about them. I want you to watch this show, so I'm not going to give it away here. But if you look at each of these characters' story, can feel like its own short story that's teaching some kind of lesson that we're not instilling by telling you to believe it, showing by example for something for you to follow, which I think that's very kind of brazen for a show like this to do.
It is done so well, and that goes back to where the whole show sets itself up for this success, because it is a show. And it's all just not forced upon you all at once either. That's why it's a gradual effect. You kind of learn all about all this stuff throughout the show.
We're all singing the praise of this. We're talking about how great the show is. There's two things I have a problem with. The first one not being so serious, and then the second one could make or break it, I think, for a lot of people, and it depends on how you feel about it. So the first one, Adam, is I think you notice right away. There's obvious young people in old makeup. What do you think about that, Adam, when you saw that for the first time?
I said that Mike Flanagan must have found the makeup cabinet, because it slapped it on everybody.
Everyone's got it. That being all said, again, we're not talking about spoilers here. When you see almost every character in this show in some form of old age makeup, that's going to let your mind wander onto what's going to happen next. Either we're going to see them younger, something's going to happen where they become younger. Again, not going into details, but when the makeup's so poorly done, it definitely takes you out of the element.
Even before anything happens, I'm like, that's an odd approach.
Right. And if you see one actor, okay. You see two actors, sure, why not? When you see, again, the whole cast in this, it really starts to come across as there's something more going on here. It would be considered a spoiler if I talk too much about it. Just know it's there, and it's there for a purpose. If you can ignore it, great. If you can't, it's going to bother you like it did me. It doesn't hurt from the show's writing or anything whatsoever. It's still a fantastic show, but it's there. Which goes into something that I think is going to bother a lot of people. It certainly bothered me once I noticed the pattern of it, and it's the way the people speak in this show. A lot of the times in Mike Flanagan's work, you'll see characters conversing with one another, and I think this is probably the strongest show where we have just long pieces of conversation, to the point where it's almost a monologue for everything. Everything in this show happens to be a monologue, whether you're just getting a simple bit of information or characters are going back and forth with dueling monologues. There's one particular scene where Riley and Erin are talking about death. They're just conversing with one another. Again, looks pretty, it's shot well. The actors are giving a great performance, but I couldn't wait for it to end at some point because they were so long. It bothers you because a lot of this show feels so realistic. The performances feel unique and a lot of expression in everyone's performance. But when you hear these long, drawn out scenes of people just, it's not that they're reading, I don't want it to come across like that, but they're just spewing this long verbiage.
I remember when Riley, he goes over his monologue first, and then I was like, wow, that was really deep. And then Aaron started, I said, oh my God, she's starting too?
It feels like almost Shakespearean to a point where it's really annoying. And once you notice the pattern, you kind of sigh a little bit and just go with it. Not saying that what they're saying isn't interesting, because it usually is, but it's wordy and it's long and you have to be ready to commit to what's going to be said.
That's what kind of feeds it into, it's a good thing this is a show.
Right.
Because if it was a movie, then people would be asleep in the audience.
Yeah, I think the pacing, it's not broken up enough to where you can handle it. You got an hour and 40 minutes maybe at most to talk about everything you got to talk about. Some of these monologues feel like they're an hour and 40 minutes at times. Again, not saying it's not interesting, but you're going to feel it. It's going to be a little painful, but the payoff's going to be worth it in the end. I just want you to know that. All right, so I think at this point we've said pretty much everything we could talk about this show without me going into a monologue. So let's bring it to those final scores. I'm going to give Midnight Mass an A.
Sometimes it's okay to just look at the world and say, why? I don't understand. And I will not. Yeah, sometimes that's okay. Yeah, I actually agree with that.
I think the show is phenomenal. I don't know if it's better than Haunting of Hill House for me. I really love A Haunting of Hill House. I think that might be one of his best efforts into the TV show genre. It's a toss-up. I think there's a lot of conversation there, but the story's refreshing. The cinematography is beautiful. Everything in the show absolutely works. You feel like you're there. You're experiencing this story. And after that, I think you're going to have some really long and interesting discussions, whether it's with another person like me and Adam just talking about this show, or just, internally reflecting. It's interesting when horror can make you do something like that for a genre that is so thrown away a lot of the times for just being bloody or gory. It's interesting to see like this new evolution of horror. I'm really liking it. I do hope it continues. And Mike Flanagan, if there's a director to do it, he's definitely one of the best working today for this. Adam, where do you stand with this show?
I have decided to give the show an A-.
I'm gonna tell you a story, but you're not gonna believe it. I just need you to listen. You promise me that?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
Solely because of the couple little issues that we had with it. And I think just because of the fact of how obviously this show does delve into religion, I don't know if that would turn off a lot of people. Once you get past that, though, you're in for a wild ride.
I agree 100%. I can see your perspective. I actually kind of leaned and teetered between the two, between an A and an A-. For someone who watches so much schlocky horror like I do, seeing something new like this is absolutely phenomenal, and I can't praise that enough. But I can see where you're coming from. A- is justifiable.
Still an A.
It's still an A. We can't talk that. It's a dirty A, but it's an A nonetheless. If you guys like what you've seen here today, consider giving this video a like and leaving your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to stay up to date with everything Real Movie Guys related, make sure to hit that subscribe button and check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And don't forget, all you audio listeners at home, we are available on many podcasting platforms. Just search The Real Movie Guys, you should pop right up. Thank you again all so much for joining us on this episode of The Real Review. We are The Real Movie Guys. Real guys, real movies, real thoughts. Catch you next time.